through posthuman vulnerabilities is a little bit of a convergence. It's a mishmash of different concepts, ideas and pieces of work from my time across UK and Canadian disability studies. Broadly, I want to speak to the themes of emotion, affect and intimacy, disability arts, storytelling and vulnerability as well. So as such, this paper is relatively reflexive, which isn't usual terrain for me, so I'm a little bit more cautious today than I would otherwise be. It's also a real work in progress, I should say. It's little more at the moment than a collection of thoughts, really, upon which I welcome some feedback. So, as part of this reflexive practice, I'm going to be screening a short film I made called Me and You during my time as a participant, a facilitator and a researcher within Project Revision, which is a Canadian Institute for Health Research Arts-Informed Research project. Get that out, please. So Project Revision puts on digital storytelling and drama workshops in which disabled, MAD identified, Aboriginal and other othered women and healthcare providers create new and multiple representations of embodied difference with the aim of disrupting stereotypical understandings that create barriers to healthcare. So we mobilise arts-based approaches to create deep understandings of difference that disrupt dominant narratives and open up possibilities. So, as part of this work, we draw on research knowledge and the expertise of those with lived experience of difference. We create space for first-person narratives of experience. We pursue multi-directional conversations as we work at the intersections of and transgress boundaries between arts and science, researcher-participant, community, academia, teacher-student, practitioner-client, and theory and practice. We foster knowledge or knowledges related to the practice and impact of arts-based methods. We engage with tensions as we pursue complexities, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about that in my paper. We facilitate sustainable storytelling and the proliferation of voices, and particularly marginalised ones, and we create art to catalyse social change. So, through its mobile media lab, Project Revision enters community, academic and healthcare settings, enabling participants to tell their digital story. So a digital story, if you don't know, is a 2 to 3 minute short film which combines a voice narrative with artwork, photos, images, music, and artwork as well. So the voice narrative actually emerges organically through participation in a story circle, and I want to draw upon this in my paper. As a project team, we were very lucky enough to be trained by the Centre for Digital Storytelling in Berkeley, California. Through the workshop process, digital stories emerge as rich products, first and foremost as pieces of art in their own right, as radical stories for disability justice, and of course as data. And thanks to the wonders of modern technology, i.e. Skype, this is a collaboration that I'm lucky enough to be continuing with despite now living thousands of miles away from the Canadian team. So in my paper today, I want to reflect on some of my own experiences as both a participant and a researcher in arts-informed research of this kind. I then want to use some of these reflections to ask some broader critical questions about the possibilities of vulnerability for research, for disability justice and activism, and for researcher practice. So I'm sure a few people in this room will be familiar with Braidotti and her work. But if not, I just want to offer a very, very brief overview. So in Posthuman, her 2013 text, Braidotti holds the human to account. So in doing so, she identifies the human as purposefully narrow, meaning that, in essence, only privileged few feel the security of the boundaries of this category or are granted its tremendous social, political, cultural and economic power. As Braidotti posits, quote, humanity, or the archetypal human, is very much a male of the species. It is a he. This universal man is implicitly assumed to be masculine, to be white, urbanised, speaking a standard language, heterosexually inscribed in a reproductive unit, and a full citizen of recognised polity. According to Goodley, Lawtham and Brunswick Cole, all of whom are here, the super team, this vision of the human has at its core a Eurocentrism, as well as imperialist tendencies, quote, meaning that many of those outside of Europe, including the colonies, become to be known as less than human or inhuman. So this particular framing of the human then ensures that some of us are more human than others, and that many come to be excluded from the category of the human. So later in the work, Braidotti argues that claiming a radical posthuman subjectivity rests on the notion of becoming. She even calls it becoming posthuman. Now I want to draw on this idea for a moment and situate it within the context of a project revision workshop. So within the context of a revision workshop, we work really hard to create the conditions for such post-conventional possibilities. So we purposefully set up our workshops to be spaces of radical relationality, of community, of accessibility and accountability, and to try and create intimate, nourishing and safer spaces to tell our stories. With a dialogical emphasis and a polyvocal approach, revision offers rich spaces in which storytellers' stories are told and heard in new ways. As Ben Mayer, a scholar who she actually uses digital storytelling techniques in her teaching, which is awesome, she says the process allows participants to theorise from the flesh. So revision also requires and creates community in vital ways. So this coming together, or in the context of the posthuman, becoming together, serves to embody and enrich individual stories, since, as Ben Mayer states, without community, stories would not be as deep and powerful as they are. On a personal level, for me, it was a really, or has been, and remains a really incredible part of the project to be part of and working to build this kind of quite radical community, as we would identify it. And we collectively realise that many of us, as disabled and othered women, seldom get space in our cultures to share, to work together and to be together. So for the workshops themselves, we welcome in participants or filmmakers who are routinely culturally disavowed. So those offered only a subhuman status in the context of the human. So women, disabled, mad people, people with addictions, fat people, queer and trans folk, and First Nations people. The workshop serves as a space which inadvertently enables the posthuman subject, who for Braidotti exists, quote, within an eco-philosophy of multiple belongings, as a relational subject constituted in and by multiplicity. That is to say, a subject that works across differences, but is still grounded and accountable. Posthuman subjectivity expresses an embodied and embedded and hence partial form of accountability based on a strong sense of collectivity, relationality, and hence community building. So our storytellers come to foster narratives that are multiple, that are complex, that are very disruptive, that are tangled and always intertwined. Their narratives don't seek to idealise, normalise or overcome. They're not co-opted or appropriated. They are told, sculpted and quite literally created by the person living at their core. Further, the stories speak back to cultural representations which routinely are the myriad selves, lives and bodies. Through creative media, they come to contest, critique and create normative understandings of disability and difference. So we believe in revision workshops that the art that emanates from the workshops, and then the ways in which we go on to curate and screen the films, facilitate an acceptance or an emergence of a posthuman subjectivity. So, I was hoping that would be brighter. Oh, well. I want to speak a little bit more closely now to my own experience as a filmmaker and eventually an artist within revision, to unpack this idea a little bit further for you. So the most profound effect of revision for me was the way in which my own story could be reimagined, I guess, alongside what Braidotti calls affirmative politics. Affirmative politics, she argues, quote, combine critique with creativity in the pursuit of alternative visions and subjects. So, developing my existing scholarly critiques through creative media in this brilliant artistic context enabled a more nuanced and affirmative conversation, a means through which to facilitate multiplicity and vulnerability of identities, of emotions, of embodiment and of labour. So in essence, the process allowed me to become the complexities that I'd only previously imagined. So I experienced digital storytelling as a form of autopoiesis or self-creation, which offered new ways of living the complexities of self as desirable, as necessary, and as needed. So rather than speaking back, as we often say in revision, I was speaking to myself in ways that didn't seek to simplify or distill my lived experience. So I'm now going to play my film. I must apologise, this particular version isn't actually captioned. The captioned version is still in Canada, thousands of miles away. But I do actually have a script, if anybody would like a script of the narrative.
Me and you. I've been ashamed of you and hidden you. I've hated you because you don't fit, even though this doesn't fit our fight. I've been disappointed by you and apologised for you. You invite gazes that make me feel shame, whether they are on the street or in the doctor's office. But I'm proud of you. Your strength, your beauty, and your perseverance. I like you and I love you. I love that you've allowed me adventures, taken me to people, places, and spaces. But I worry for you, our future together. Can we do the things that we're supposed to do and be the things that we're supposed to be? Who knows? Will you hurt me more? The pain that you send through me, sometimes for no reason at all, even when I've abided by your rules. But we're in this together, me and you, entwined and inescapable. We can't exist alone, and I wouldn't want to, because it's me and you.
Okay, so as my digital story implies, I'm an activist who feels shamed by the very oppressions I stand against. I'm an academic who opposes and critiques the academy. I'm a disabled woman who worries about the intersections of motherhood, even though I'm knowledgeable of the oppressive intersections of ableism and parenting. I'm a disabled person who experiences pain and sometimes suffering, yet I love my body and the lessons that it teaches. I'm a partner who fears the impact of future impairment, even though I have a life partner who never denies my disabled self, but rather loves me for it. I'm a lover who worries if she's good enough, even though I write about the sexual possibilities of disability every day. Since the film was made, I've actually become a long-term, permanent family foster carer, which is yet another liminal space whereby I've committed to bringing up a child without ever becoming or being a parent. And this positionality is distinctly dishuman to me. The notion that as researchers and scholars we have the tools to identify, to unpack, and to critique the normative discourse that shapes our lives and selves, but we can never live outside it or escape it. We always live in the shadows, even as knowing subjects. So telling my digital story in this way didn't remove these contradictions, but enable me to understand these realities as part of my body, self and life. As Braidotti says of art, quote, it transposes us beyond the confines of bound identities. So the boundaries of lover, partner, self, future mother, scholar, activist, daughter and disabled woman, I've come to realise, are never bound, tidy or discrete, but fractured, duplicitous, unpredictable, paradoxical and fleshy. Creating a digital story has enabled, I would argue, an appreciation and even celebration of these contradictions. It has revealed to me what I imagine becoming posthuman to look like or be. So, digital stories, I suggest, can facilitate the very notion of becoming a posthuman subjectivity. Audience aside, they can teach the filmmaker about living new ways with disability and difference. They may provide elucidative strategies through which one can come to embrace the posthuman, or at least reject some of the oppressive effects of the human. Revision's digital storytelling workshops foreground the notion then that digital stories might enable posthuman ontologies. So, to finish, making myself vulnerable, both then, at the time of making the film, and here, today, screening it, is necessary to produce this kind of work or data. This vulnerability is very required of us in project revision in multiple spaces. So as workshop facilitators working with other women, during analysis, which we found has been a very collective process, amid curating, and in touring the films across Canada. So vulnerability here is necessary, productive, and full of possibility to foster community, to produce art through film, and to produce rich data for analysis. So as we discuss in our forthcoming Disability in Society paper, anthropologist Ruth Bahar coined the term vulnerable observer as a way of talking about the value of vulnerability to research. So here, researchers and practitioners make themselves vulnerable in the sense of sharing aspects of themselves in their work to shed additional light on the subject in discussion. So being a vulnerable researcher or practitioner means being present and honest with ourselves throughout our work. At the same time, it requires a willingness to be present with others' emotions and embodied experiences, to approach respectfully and tread carefully. So I guess I want to harness this in some way and ask some broader critical questions, which hopefully we'll have time for some discussion later. So, can exploring the possibilities of vulnerability in research, activism and practice serve to shift our cultural constructions of vulnerability as an undesirable state and a vulnerable subject as a denigrated other? Or, on a broader level, in the words of legal scholar Martha Feynman, what happens to culture, community and humanity when we understand vulnerability as, quote, a universal, inevitable, enduring aspect of the human condition? One which is necessary for human being and human understanding, fundamental to relationships and social life. Even more broadly, rather than vulnerability equating only to victimhood, to sapped resilience and dependence on external support, what if our shared vulnerable selves could be a starting point to build a more equal and just society where, quote, vulnerability is ground for human exchange, empowerment and growth, or, as Goodley in Goodley and Eccleston 2014 suggests, as a springboard for resistance, justice and change. Thank you very much.